Throughout time, fascination with death has been an ongoing and shared subject for many. The grim, oddly fascinating part about the afterlife involves the possibility of forming some sort of connection with a lingering entity or a loved one that might have passed. Oftentimes, either to satisfy this curiosity or to cope with loss, people will attempt to contact the dead by either visiting their gravesite or, in more extreme cases, by using certain communication devices such as a Ouija board or some sort of radio. By this point in time, as we all know, these definitely provide heavily mixed results, depending on who you are. But what about those that take this fascination too far? Historically, we've had a few very infamous names pop up about certain people keeping dead bodies for themselves. Such was the case with Carl Tanzler, the necrophile that kept a deceased and mummified 22-year-old in his home to live with him for over 7 years. This case is crazy in and of itself, but it's been covered time and time again. Because of this, I wanted to focus on a similar, if not slightly more extreme situation that came to light a few years ago, surrounding the bizarre happenings of a Russian man by the name of Anatoly Moskvin. Moskvin is a 52-year-old that, back in the mid to late 2000s, was regarded a genius by many. He was a historian who authored various scientific papers and acquired the knowledge of upwards of 13 different languages. Many of his peers and family saw him as a quiet, ordinary person with no real cause for concern regarding his behavior. The thing is, though, he had this unforgiving obsession with the afterlife, and the scientific papers and magazine publications that he would provide over the years would actually come to assist in explaining the secret and deeply outlandish behavior that he was committing right under everyone's nose. You see, Moskvin was a very disturbing character. In late 2011, he had single-handedly thrown Russian police and media into a whirlwind down one of the darkest and most bizarre criminal cases in the country's history. Backing up to 1966, Anatoly was born in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, to his parents by the names of Yuri Fedorovich and Elvira Alexandrovna. According to his parents, he was very socially awkward and had pretty intense difficulty making friends. On the flip side of this, he was extremely smart, and his parents simply chalked up his awkwardness to his intelligence, not thinking much of it. Young Anatoly had a childhood that was far from conventional, though. According to an account by him, for example, one day in the 3rd grade, he had returned home from school completely covered in bruises. As it turns out, these were caused by a man that raped him sometime that day. To date, it's unclear whether he ever relayed that information to his parents or not. This was far from the first odd instance that played out in his youth. In fact, one could argue that what we're about to discuss was the true beginning of his obsession with a very unconventional topic: the dead. This fascination stems way back to when he was only 13. In a local weekly publication that focuses on cemeteries and obituaries, Moskvin outlines a very strange ritual that he found himself tangled up in. In the publication, dated October 26, 2011, he explains that a group of men in black suits stopped him on his way home from school. They were en route to the funeral of 11-year-old Natasha Petrova and ended up dragging young Anatoly along to her coffin, where they forced him to kiss the girl's corpse. Further on in his writing, he explains that, quote, "I kissed her once, then again, then again." Afterwards, the girl's mother then allegedly placed a wedding ring on the 13-year-old's finger and one on the hand of her dead daughter. "My strange marriage with Natasha Petrova was useful," Moskvin claimed. Useful it was, as Moskvin's unapologetic obsession with the undead was just beginning to take root. After this, Moskvin began to have very ominous dreams about the dead girl. According to him, she would visit him nightly and would try to profess her knowledge of black magic upon him, whilst pleading for him to return to the village where the ritual had taken place. Apparently, after heading back there, the visitation stopped, but this would be short-lived, as once he ceased to visit it regularly, she would once again appear in his dreams. Reporting this to his parents was ineffective at best, as they simply took him to a doctor that chalked it up to Moskvin enduring puberty. With this diagnosis, he also went forth to prescribe him valerian, an herbal sedative that aids in relaxation. After an entire year of visits by Natasha, she would eventually grow tired of Moskvin's refusals to do what she wanted. Since this was the case, she tasked him with performing a black magic ritual using a classmate's tooth in exchange for her leaving him alone forever. Somehow, according to Moskvin, this ritual was carried out successfully, and as a result, she never came back again. This so-called task would have other implications on his life, however, as it successfully kicked off Anatoly's interest in black magic and the occult. Later on in life, Moskvin studied at the University of Moscow and earned a degree in Celtic Studies, a culture that bears a very close blend in beliefs between life and death. Also, he would go on to join the Society of the Luciferians and would embrace the left-hand path, which bears a focus on sexual magic and personal anarchy. This, coupled with his interest in black magic, would result in Moskvin performing various rituals on dead animals and eventually vowing celibacy. After graduation, it became known that he had grown to acquire extensive knowledge of the intricacies of all the surrounding cemeteries in his area. When sharing his knowledge throughout his various writings, he claims that he went to upwards of over 752 of them from 2005 to 2007 in his hometown for a so-called research trip. Assisted by a well-known historian named Oleg Ryabov, the two began their trek across the region to document cemeteries and to unearth local history along the way. The end goal was to publish a book by the name of Nizhny Novgorod Necropolis that contained all of his findings, but as you might have guessed, Moskvin had ulterior motives in mind. In 2009, local residents began to notice that the gravesites of their loved ones were either desecrated or dug up entirely. This eventually led to a 2-year-long investigation into these occurrences that seemed to lead nowhere at all. In 2011, an anti-Muslim terror attack would unfold at the airport in Moscow, and very shortly afterwards, authorities caught wind of some Muslim gravesites that were allegedly being dug up and vandalized. After going to investigate that for a potential terror suspect, Moskvin would quickly jump to act like he was simply painting over some gravestones. But he was, in turn, promptly arrested, caught red-handed in the act of vandalism. Shortly afterwards, police would then launch an investigation into these bizarre acts by Moskvin, and the first place of interest to search was his living quarters. Fully expecting Moskvin to be an extremist, they were anticipating the discovery of various anti-Muslim propaganda to litter his living quarters. What they would find in reality, however, would leave police completely baffled. The raid, which took place in an apartment that he actually shared with his parents, ended up leading to the discovery of 29 life-size dolls.
Russian police have released this video they shot in what can be described as a house of horrors. They say those aren't dolls strewn about the apartment, but actual remains of people a historian had dug up and dressed in women's clothing and then put on display.
The figures, heavily representing antique dolls, wore various types of clothing. Apparently, Moskvin dressed all of these up in makeup, even going as far as to place buttons or various circular objects in their eye sockets to give them a more lifelike appearance. The thing is though, these weren't simply dolls. Rather, these were all created with the dead corpses of girls ranging in age from 3 to just 12 years old. Even more disturbing, when police began to move the bodies in this investigation, most of them would emit some sort of jingle, and it was later revealed that Moskvin stuffed each of the rib cages with music boxes so they could emit some sort of audible feedback when he interacted with them. Moskvin also allegedly kept track of their birthdays in his room and celebrated them when the time came. According to police, there were photographs and plaques taken off of gravestones, doll-making manuals, and maps of local cemeteries littering the apartment. Furthermore, the clothes that most of these dolls were wearing were the actual clothes in which they were buried. Moskvin later admitted that he achieved structural integrity of the corpses by wrapping their legs and arms with rags before stuffing those into nylon tights. He performed this for each of their limbs and their faces before inserting buttons into their eye sockets as to, quote, allow them to watch cartoons with him. In police interrogations that followed, he claimed that he loved most of them. However, there were a few that he simply wasn't content with. The ones that he had grown to dislike were promptly stuffed into their small garage and left to be forgotten. Apparently, he did all this out of loneliness. His parents claimed that he'd grown this massive obsession with creating life-size dolls, and bizarrely didn't think much of it, regardless of the smell that it would emit. "We saw these dolls, but we did not suspect there were dead bodies inside. We thought it was his hobby to make such big dolls, and we didn't see anything wrong with it," his mother claimed in an interview. According to a neighbor, there would be a constantly putrid smell that would emit from their apartment every time he passed by. However, he chalked it up to being a sewage problem below the building, not thinking much of it. Out of all the corpses that he kept locked up in his apartment, there was one of them that was with him for upwards of 9 years. With all of these findings by police, Moskvin was eventually charged with extremely heavy crimes. In late 2011, with new nicknames given by the media, such as Lord of the Mummies and the Puppeteer, Moskvin eventually confessed to 44 counts of grave abuse and was sentenced to a psychiatric ward shortly afterwards. There, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and has been in confinement ever since. It's been reported that Moskvin was repeatedly beaten by guards at this facility, and according to his mother, was also fed up to 15 pills per day, which kept him in a catatonic state. Since this was the case, a human rights lawyer by the name of Violetta Volkova was hired to represent Moskvin. Her end goal was to get him out of this facility and into an independent clinic in Moscow for re-examination, expressing a primary distrust in the ward's doctors. This grueling legal fight ended up earning him a second hearing, and as of September of 2018, he was offered the opportunity to continue his psychiatric treatment at home, and alongside this, the ability to essentially walk free. As you might expect though, this decision has been met with pretty heavy controversy. One of the victim's mothers, a woman by the name of Natalia Chardomova, didn't realize that this entire time she was visiting an empty coffin when going to her daughter's gravesite. The corpse of her daughter, Olga, was one of the 29 girls that he dug up and kept locked up in his home. Apparently, she had been brutally murdered at age 10, and it's completely tragic to think about what this mother could have gone through during that. Coming to the realization that her daughter was taken from her not only once, but a second time infuriates her, and she's one of the very many that unapologetically oppose the potential release of him. He needs to be kept under surveillance. This creature brought fear, terror, and panic into my life. Anatoly Moskvin is set to walk free from a psychiatric ward sometime this year. The order of his containment with the facility was set to expire last December, so his release comes in only a matter of time. While he might walk as a quote-unquote free man, his crimes will forever go down as some of the darkest and most bizarre in history. The emotions that these parents are going through is completely inconceivable, and we can only hope that authorities keep a close eye on him for the remainder of his life, as he could very easily still possess the inner drive to continue with his disturbing antics. Thank you so much for watching.
Like, subscribe, comment. Just because you don't actually know him and he's just online doesn't mean you can bully him and be nasty. You wouldn't do that in a pub. You wouldn't go into the pub and say those sort of things because you'd worry that someone would punch your face in. Well, treat the internet in the same way. It's like a pub. So don't do it online, okay? Like, subscribe, comment, be nice.